Good afternoon, everybody. So I want to talk about Carmelo Anthony. I am tired of hearing about Carmelo Anthony. For those who don't know, he's not in the NBA right now, and a lot of people are saying that, well, he should be. There's constant talks about Melo getting stuff. This one guy said that Melo should punch LeBron in the face for having JaVale McGee or something over Melo on the Lakers team. Or, Chris Broussard saying that Melo is better than 70% of the players in the NBA, which that's stretching it a little, but anyway, and talk about Kyrie and KD trying to push him on the Nets, and every time, I even think when DeMarcus Cousins got hurt, people were talking about Melo or something. It's getting tiresome. Melo is not on an NBA roster for pretty much similar reasons to why Colin Kaepernick is not on an NFL roster. You see, Melo, he's not the Carmelo he once was. He's basically a name brand at this point. When you look at Melo, here's the thing about Carmelo Anthony's career. He's a great player. He's had a great career. And he's achieved some things. And he's had a great career. He was a great player. But, the thing with Melo is, while he was a great player and he got his numbers, he wasn't a team player. And he really didn't make teams better. You compare it after Denver and the Knicks made that trade. The Nuggets went, I think, 18-7 after the trade. So so they won 72% of their basketball games. While the Knicks were a 500 team after the Melo trade. Now, part of it, yes, was Melo. The Knicks gave up half their team to get Melo, but part of it was also, that still is something to look at, especially when you consider 18-7 to 14-14. You're comparing the West to the East. While the East wasn't terrible that year, as they had great teams, Chicago, Miami, Boston, Orlando mainly. While they had four very excellent teams, the West, was even deeper. With the Spurs and the Mavs and the Thunder and the Lakers all winning 55-plus games. And, so the West was a bloodbath then. So in a tougher conference, the Nuggets did significantly better after the Melo trade. And then you go the next year, they had a better record. The first full year, they had a better record than the Knicks, and they went farther in the playoffs against the Knicks. Granted, because they took the Lakers 7 while the Knicks got bounced down 5 by Miami. Now, in fairness to Melo, they were playing, as Miami compared to the Lakers, who kind of overachieved that year, but still. But even then, we can look at it the same way. In the final year, 2012-2013 season, the Knicks won 54 games, the best Knicks team in recent memory, while the Nuggets won 57 games. So the Nuggets won more games in a tougher conference than the Knicks that year. We're talking about a year where the 5 seed were my Memphis Grizzlies, who had 56 wins. So, and now granted, yes, they lost in the first round to Golden State while the Knicks won, but, just while I was fair to Melo with talking about the previous year, they were playing the Knicks played the old age Boston Celtics while the war, so that's the main reason. Now, the Nuggets fell off a cliff for about a few years after they fired George Karl, and they're now on the upswing again. But, it's the same thing. And you go to Oklahoma City now, a big reason for this is Russell Westbrook. And Paul George deserves some blame too. But, you look at it, he goes to the Thunder. And even after they added Paul George, so they add both him and Paul George to the team. They win just one more game and just one more playoff game. And then he goes, and conversely, you look at the Knicks. The year after Melo leaves the Knicks, the Knicks win just 2 fewer games the previous year, despite the fact that Kristaps Porzingis suffered an injury. I forget what injury it was, but he suffered an injury, costing him a lot of the year, and like Tim Hardaway was out at times that year. So the Knicks had, the year after Carmelo Anthony left, that was traded, the Knicks had 2 major injuries and won just 2 fewer, and still won only 2 fewer games than the previous year. I mean, they were on pace to win around 35 games. They were on pace before Kristaps got hurt to win more games than they did the previous year after losing Melo. Now, so you look at it, Carmelo Anthony, he's a great player, but he's a great player, but you, like on a fantasy basketball team, you want Carmelo, but on a regular team, he's like, I don't know a better way to put it, but he's a great player who will get his points and he'll help you to some degree, but and while he's maybe not, causes problems in the locker room or something, it's just the way he maybe acts. And like you had Chauncey Billups, guy who played with him in Denver. Chauncey Billups said it best that Carmelo Anthony, he cared scoring 30 meant too much. Like Melo, he was a ball hog, and there are times he would rather score 36 points and lose than score 22 points. Alright, sorry about that, just heard a weird noise. Then score 22 points and win. So, and that's gonna rub people the wrong way. And it's like, LeBron, we hear all about him and LeBron being best friends, but yet LeBron almost never. Like, I remember, there was a time when they were trying to trade, there were talks of trading Carmelo Anthony for Kevin Love, and LeBron, and it's like LeBron had issues with Kevin Love, and Melo's his boy, Melo's his friend, and yet the Cavs didn't make the trade. It's because Carmelo Anthony, he's a great player, but he's not a good team player, because he doesn't seem to want to win as much as he should, and he seems to want to prioritize his stats and achievements over the team achievements. And you look at it, it's just like, this is a guy who was like, when people suggested that he come off the bench for Oklahoma City, the guy's like, I'm not coming off the bench. Like, dude, it's like, you're not willing to do what's best for the team. It's... So that's mainly, in my opinion, why the reason Melo is not in the league is, while, yes, he can still play, and while, yes, he might still be a good player, he simply is not the player he once was. And it's like, players, when you're a great player, teams are going to be willing to tolerate your nonsense. But now that he's somewhat a shell of his former self and isn't the player he once was, teams don't want to put up with your nonsense. And that's, to me, a big reason why he's out of the NBA, is because he's no longer the player he once was, and when you're a shell of your former self, and even if you're just a decent player, if you're not an excellent player to where you can mute it out, then you're not going to be in the league. Then teams don't want to put up with you. Barry Bonds, last year in the majors, he was still a good player. He had 26 home runs. I know that he was still a good player. He was, very similar to Melo. He was arguably a better baseball player his last year with the San Francisco Giants, his last year in Major League Baseball, than Carmelo is an NBA player at this moment. And yet, the Giants didn't offer him a contract, and teams didn't want him in because while he was still a good player, he wasn't the guy who was putting up ghastly numbers, and his personality rubbed so many people the wrong way And with all the stuff of him cheating and dishonoring the game of baseball, and, teams didn't want to put up with him anymore because he wasn't he was only a good player at that point. He wasn't, we're talking about a guy who was still arguably an all-star. He was an all-star last year, partly because, the game was in San Francisco, but he was arguably still an all-star player, and the Giants and no MLB team wanted him because while he was still arguably a good player, it's just teams didn't want to put up with his nonsense anymore. And I could think, Colin Kaepernick, and people are like, well, Colin Kaepernick's better than certain guys who can play. Every time, like Andrew Luck just retired, and I think there are people who are like Kaepernick maybe, and people constantly, it's like every time a team's struggling with their quarterbacks, or struggling, or a starter goes down, like, oh, Colin Kaepernick. Well, Colin Kaepernick, is not that good of a quarterback anymore. Some might say, well, he's still good enough to play. And look, while it's nothing egregious he did, now, I approve his decision to protest police brutality. I agree with him there. I don't really agree with him choosing the national anthem to do it, but that's not the point. So I approve of his decision to protest police brutality. I just would rather him not do it for the national anthem, but that's not even the point. Thing is, with Colin Kaepernick, he might be good enough to play in the NFL, but the guy is 4-20 in his last 24 starts, and while we can debate the legitimacy of a quarterback win-loss record, at the same time, when the record is that bad, it's like, it's really, no matter how bad the roster is, if you're at least a good quarterback, it shouldn't be, you could still maybe have a losing record, but it shouldn't be like 4-20, which is what his record was in his last 24 starts, and he was 3-16 in his previous 2 seasons, and when the record is that bad, it's, you can have a bad team, but even if you have a bad roster, if you're still a good quarterback, you should still probably be at least not be that bad. And it's like Kaepernick, you look at it, he wasn't very good in any of his last 3 years in San Francisco. He was a mediocre quarterback at best, average at best his last 3 years. Basically once teams caught on to him and stuff, he was never quite the same, and he was never really the same after choking in the NFC Championship game in Seattle. So, the point I'm making is, he's at best, at this point, he's a mediocre quarterback, and when you bring so much news because of your protest, it's you're a distraction. Teams don't want to deal with distractions, because teams that win don't have distractions. The Pittsburgh Steelers, have had a ton of talent last year, but why did they miss the playoffs? Distractions. So, you notice how the Patriots, the model franchise of the NFL, don't have a lot of distractions. Spurs, same thing. You look at a team like the Cubs or the Braves who are winning, or the Astros, you don't see a lot of distractions. Don't see a lot of distractions with the Boston Bruins. So, the point is, teams don't like distractions, and while you can maybe play in the NFL, you don't outweigh, it's you're not good enough to overcome the distraction, and that's similar to Melo. Now, while Kaepernick, it's not his fault, it's just how it is. With Melo, it is mostly his fault. He's never been a team player, and he could get away with it when he was one of a lethal scorer, but, it's like teams don't want to put up with, if you don't have, unless you're a talent, unless you're doing stuff, Antonio Brown's the best wide receiver in the NFL, And the Pittsburgh Steelers, arguably at least, the Pittsburgh Steelers got rid of him because because of how big a distraction he was, and he was balling. He was still producing at a high level. So I'm just kind of over Carmelo Anthony. If he doesn't play again in the NBA, he doesn't play again. He's while he's had a great career, his career has been somewhat disappointing, and he has wasted his career at times. And that's on him, that's on him. So I'm just over the Carmelo Anthony story. There's stories that I just get over fast. I got over the Malcolm Butler stuff with the Super Bowl, Eagles Patriots Super Bowl. I was over that like 3 weeks into it. I was like when we were talking about July and August, I'm like, really? And Bill Belichick, was like, asked a question. He's like, Malcolm's in Tennessee now. Why am I? He's not even on our team anymore. It's like, same with the Chicago Bears at times having to still put up with Brandon Marshall even after he'd been traded to the Jets. It's like Bears fans and people will be like, he's not on the team. Like, if you're not, it's like, I got over all the garbage of the Seahawks Patriots Super Bowl like 3 weeks in. Like, get over it. The Seahawks arguably made the right call. The Patriots put 8 men in like the box, so Marshawn Lynch would have had a brutally hard time getting into the end zone. And I'm like, it's, to me, things get old fast, and I'm just over Carmelo Anthony. Because, what, I understand why he's not in the NBA, and really, do I feel sorry for him? No, he's brought it on himself, because he never prioritized the team's needs, and winning never meant as much to him as it should have. Like, scoring seemed to mean more to Melo than winning. And when you're no longer an elite player, when you're just maybe a serviceable player, which arguably is what Melo is, when he's like decent at best at this point, and you kind of can be a little cancerous in the locker room, it's understandable to see why teams, because with players who are distractions and cause trouble, when they're producing, then you can like deal with it, but it's like at some point when they're causing distractions and they're not so overwhelmingly good to overcome it, then you're not going to put up with it. And that's really, to me, why Carmelo Anthony's on the NBA, and he only has himself to blame, in my opinion. So that's my thoughts on the Carmelo Anthony situation. So thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please, it would be nice to comment and subscribe. So thank you very much.